Uncle Doug.
Heyo.
I don't know if you know this, but I have the power to move things with my mind.
I didn't know that. It seems like something that should have come up before, but okay.
Okay, so I want you to imagine this, because you've actually seen me do it, but you didn't know I was doing it at the time. If I pick any finger on either of my hands, I can just with using my mind, I can make it wiggle. Matter of fact, pretty much all the moving that I do, it is initiated by my mind. So
I thought you were going to say that you take it out of your head and push things around the table with it. So there's like
I take my mind out of my head.
This big brain snail track all over the table, or use it as an oven mitt.
Most of my
that would be the best use for my mind that has ever happened.
Most of my movement comes from my brain, except when I'm doing the forbidden dance.
Right.
That all comes from my loins.
That comes from your corazón.
Mm-hmm.
The heart. Yeah, and that's why the dance is forbidden, Doug, and we've talked about this. But
yeah, you definitely can't do that dance within 500 meters of a school. I know that.
Not again.
Not since.
That's just because of Big Charleston.
Do you remember we went on the Cognitive Dissonance podcast and they asked us what the gayest dance was, and I immediately answered the Charleston. It is so gay. I have had a choreographer, a professional choreographer, tell me that to my own face. So
we're going to get so many letters.
So guys, from angry Charlestoners. So guys, a few weeks back I did a little segment on the great Nostradamus. And the 100% of literally nothing he ever predicted. Remember that? That one.
Yes. And he knew you were going to do it, too.
He so saw that coming. But I started out that segment by talking about he was one of the things my 1970s afternoon television viewing made me think were going to be much, much bigger factors in my adult life. The others being quicksand, chloroform, and a little thing called the Bermuda Triangle. And I think we're going to have a little more on that later. But there was another thing that the countless shows about the paranormal and Johnny Carson's Tonight Show of the late 70s and early 80s had me convinced was a pretty big deal, and that was psychokinesis.
Yes!
Yes. But not just any psychokinesis. No, siree. It was the kind of psychokinesis brought to the American viewing public by the very intense Israeli strange person by the name of Uri Geller.
Yes.
And Uri Geller's patented form of magical psychokinesis, which is the topic of today's segment, was the pointless destruction of flatware known as spoon bending.
Hooray.
Amazing.
So, quick aside to anyone out there who might be the child of a Gen Xer or generally just worried about one of us in some way. Let's talk about 70s television for a second, okay?
I'm generally worried about us in every way.
Totally. So not only was 70s TV positively awash in trash like the saintly Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of series that puked Noah's Ark trutherism and ancient alien rubbish into the world, and shysters like Uri Geller given airtime to bend spoons with his big brain, but literal horrors like H.R. Pufnstuf, Lidsville, Land of the Lost, Electra Woman and Dinah Girl, and Bigfoot and Wild Boy, and even Sigmund and the Sea Monster, television made specifically for children, were beamed into the Gen X brain by perhaps history's greatest monsters, Sid and Marty Krofft, every day. I'm serious, ye millennials and Gen Zers. If you haven't heard of any of that shit, pause the show and do a Google image search for Lidsville or H.R. Pufnstuf. Do it. I'll wait.
You know what's funny about that is if you watch Adult Swim now, which is late night stoner television, there are cartoons that are specifically made for kids for adults on weed.
Yeah.
And, that's great. More power to you. But if you were to show one of those groups of kids in the basement on the couch an episode of H&R Pufnstuf, it would scare the hell out of them.
They would never recover. They would never function in society again. So these were the waking nightmares of Generation X. It's a wonder any of us can even tie our shoes with that level of televised childhood trauma affecting tens of millions of us. It is fucked up. There's actually I found a video. Have you ever seen those videos where they show kids things for the first time? Like,
oh, yeah.
It's really funny and the kids are cute. And so they were showing kids of like 8 to 12 H.R. Puffin stuff and Lidsville and Land of the Lost, and they're just like, what is happening? Yeah. What is this stuff? So anyway, now that I've overshared about another dimension of my childhood trauma, let's get back to the spoons. I don't really want this to become a segment too much about Uri Geller, partly because he is madly litigious and sues everybody for everything, but mostly because he's actually an interesting subject who deserves his very own segment someday. But it's pretty hard to talk about spoon bending without his smiling face popping up like a bad penny again and again. So the other reason I want to talk about spoon bending is because the term spoonbender, which we've used a time or two here on the show, seems to have fallen out of common usage as a term for a huckster or a fraud, specifically of the religious or spiritual kind. And I don't think we should let that happen, listening audience. It's just too delicious a descriptive to let fall from the parlance. So, okay, so for those not familiar, let's get the terms laid out. What is psychokinesis? Well, as I mentioned above, it is something we, who grew up in the 70s, all thought was going to be a huge job market in our adult lives. Psychokinesis, oftentimes interchangeable or replaced with telekinesis, is the paranormal, quote, ability of someone to influence a physical object without physical contact with that object, which is going to be hilarious in a minute. It comes from a combination of the Greek words for soul and movement. So it's a classic portmanteau. I can only think of Mr. Burns when I see that word for some reason. Portmanteau. There's a whole universe of paranormal parlor tricks that fall under the psycho or telekinesis umbrella. So things like levitation, seeing concealed symbols or objects, like the experiment made famous by Bill Murray, being very cruel in Ghostbusters. Levitation, even the teleportation of objects through space, and of course the bending of metal with the mind. When our friend Uri Geller began appearing on American television in the 70s, society was emerging from the mad, anything goes, sort of spiritual, sexual, and let's be honest, chemical explorations of the 1960s, and trying to make some sense out of that national drug-fueled tantric rumspringa. This was fertile soil for all sorts of spiritualist and supernaturalist claims to take hold of a credulous and slightly hungover America. Remember, this is the moment so many of the cults we talk about sprung to life and gained loads of willing members. And as reflected in the television programming of the time, some pretty outlandish ideas were mainstreamed. So Uri Geller could appear on TV and claim that he had enough cerebral kilowattage to bend metal. And I think it's important that by what Geller kind of really came to prominence in the mid-70s, that's about when the flower children had found their way into kind of the professional, the production level of television.
Right.
And all those seekers that had been tripping their dick off all through the 60s suddenly were suits at networks. So it kind of makes sense that a lot of those people were like, hey, let's get this guy on.
Well, and Geller himself had been, I don't know if you're going to get to this, but he had been studied by guys at Harvard or MIT or something.
Yeah. I'll get to it a little bit at Stanford.
Okay.
And they fell for it.
Everybody was falling for it back. I think people just wanted magic to be real.
Yeah, I think there's something very specific about that time in America. The 70s were this very weird time, post-60s, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about it in my segment too. For some reason, there was just all things mystic, all things
were automatically true.
Ancient were just true.
Yeah.
Everybody just wanted magic to be, and that eventually probably that same attitude took a dark turn, and that's what led to the Satanic Panic.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
And I mean, when we were kids, it was I knew not many things, but I knew for sure that airplanes would refuse to fly over the pyramids. That was a known thing.
Well, the ley lines, they can't cross ley lines.
Exactly.
So the 70s gave us so many art forms that we seem to have lost the taste for these days, guys. Things like macrame, making yarn and dowel god's eyes. Remember those? Using torches to malform glass Pepsi bottles and fill them with layers of colored sand. Key parties,
beautiful.
Smoking while jogging, and naturally spoon bending. So it's possible a younger generation who has not tasted of these other tobacco-tinged delights may not have experienced the art of pointlessly ruining silverware with one's brainwaves. So the bender allows the audience to examine the spoon. That's kind of classic, right? If it's at a house party, for instance, they may physically pass it around. If it's at a stage magic show or on a TV show, they will hold it up to the audience, tap it on a glass or a tabletop to establish its metallic bona fides, say a word or two about the process, then either by themselves or with a volunteer holding the ends, begin to massage the narrowest point between the handle and bowl of the spoon. And as they do, wouldn't you know it, that point begins to bend or deflect visibly, oftentimes until the spoon snaps in two pieces. My God, it's a wonder of the mind. Hats off to you, mighty mentalist. And while people like Geller were telling you this was all a function of his mind, it was rather a function of yours. Well, of the viewers anyway. Any magician worth their salt would know the classic elements of this trick and see them from a mile away. First, a lot can be determined by what happens with the examination of the spoon. If people are allowed to handle it, that makes for a better trick, but doesn't necessarily change how it's accomplished. If the viewer is only shown the spoon, meaning not allowed to touch it, there's kind of a much easier version of the trick. So what happens between the examination and the actual bending is where the magic is. And that is what magicians call the misdirect. In what appears to be a casual moment, the bender will make some comment or a joke, or get up from a chair or shift their weight in some way. And in that moment, they have just a quick second to pre-bend the spoon. Simple as that. And they can do it with one hand. Then they present it in such a way as to hide the bend. So say if it was in a TV studio, they would show the spoon just kind of flat and frontally to the camera, and then only reveal the bend after some massaging. And spoons can also be pre-scored, meaning sliced really deeply on the backside, or that you can do that thing where you bend and bend and bend metal back and forth until it's almost broken from a phenomenon called metal fatigue. Now, I thought metal fatigue was what happened to me after 2 years of living with a roommate that would get drunk and think he was in Metallica and then sloppily jam along to the CD of Master of Puppets with his untuned electric guitar until 2:30 in the morning. No, that was fatiguing metal, but not actual metal fatigue. And Doug, you know who that was.
I do, unfortunately.
So they can precondition the spoon to be one or two thick motions from little motions from snapping in half. One version of the trick has the bender pinching the narrow end of the spoon, the narrow bit of the spoon between thumb and forefinger while working the bowl with the other hand. And then once they're aware that the fatigued or pre-scored spoon has snapped, they pull away their other hand and then slowly release the pressure on the snapped spoon, making it appear to magically melt like a Salvador Dali clock to the gasps of the amazed audience. As magic tricks go, it's damn near one of the simplest ones there is. And what's really ironic is that none of what I described, whether you believe it's just a magic trick or real brain bending, none of that is psychokinesis. Psychokinesis, or PK, is the claim to affect a physical object while making no physical contact with the object. Right. They're physically touching the spoon. Hilarious, but I digress. So here's what's kind of nutty, and this is what Dan was alluding to earlier with Stanford, is several universities and institutions tested people claiming to have psychokinetic powers during the spoon-bending heyday of the 70s and 80s. But because... that was a bad time to be a spoon, wasn't it, fellas? But because the people conducting these tests were scientists, they were looking at the issue from a purely clinical perspective. They weren't thinking like magicians. Right. So, remarkably, they were fooled in several cases by the people allegedly possessing PK, including Uri Geller. Another two of the crafty young men who fooled another group of scientists by claiming and then demonstrating psychokinetic powers, then revealed themselves to be in the employ of a merry trickster we've discussed before here on the show, the late, very great, amazing James Randi. I won't go into this part of the story here, but Randi and Geller danced their spite dance together for decades.
Yeah.
They were enemies for decades. So Dan talked about one of Randy's most amazing takedowns, that of Christian fraud Peter Popoff in episode 57. And it turns out Geller was another target of Randy's fraud-exposing ire, including a sort of act of sabotage concocted in collusion between the amazing Randy and Johnny Carson on the night of August 1st, 1973.
Oh, yeah. Leading to one of television's most awkward moments of all time.
Brutally, and it's long. It's like 24 minutes. A handsome, young, and soft-spoken Geller sits down on the set of The Tonight Show, looking rather surprised by a table of props laid out before him. I didn't know this, but it turns out Carson was an amateur magician himself, and was dubious about Geller's pretty outlandish claims. So he contacted Randy and then had a set of objects that Geller commonly used in his appearances procured for the show, but they were prepared exactly to Randy's specifications. For instance,
meaning that Geller couldn't get his hands on them beforehand.
They weren't rigged in the way he needed them to be rigged.
Right.
So, for instance, Geller used to do this thing where, film canisters, God, there's probably people listening that don't know what a film canister is because they're so young. But you used to buy film, which was this chemical shit that was sensitive to light, and it was a goddamn nightmare to put in your camera.
They're big metal circles.
In a little can, in a little tiny, like a 1/3 scale soda can.
Oh, those little. Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
like a Red Bull cut in half.
Yeah,
teeny thing. And
also, you could get 24 whole pictures.
Yes,
if you were lucky. So anyway, he had a thing where they'd put out 10 of them, and one of them had water in it, and he couldn't see, right, because they're aluminum. And so he would move this tray around that they were on and be able, with his mind, to determine which one had the water in it, because, of course, they would move differently when he moved the tray around.
Right.
So Randy had the prop guy apply rubber cement to the bottom of the film can, let it dry, and then so it had a little kind of rubber grippy.
Right.
And there also wasn't on a tray that he could move around. So Geller was just kind of stumped, and the night was just terribly embarrassing. And he tried to bend a spoon with Ricardo Montalban and got a tiny little bend out of it, but nothing impressive. So, and so as I said, you can see this takedown on YouTube. It's super easy to find, and you can also see the whole thing explained in the excellent documentary about the amazing Randy, An Honest Liar, directed by none other than local boy Tyler Measom, who co-produced and directed Murder Among the Mormons.
Yep.
A show Doug reviewed a couple of episodes back, dealing with the Mark Hoffman bombings. Small world, I suppose. So, since that time, under properly supervised clinical observation, no credible evidence of PK power has ever been proven. No spoons got bent just sitting on a table while a guy stared intently at it while rubbing his temples. Now, if they had, they would have been eligible to collect $1 million of cold hard U.S. cash money from the amazing Randy's Foundation. Until his recent death, this cash prize to reward real proof of his supernatural or paranormal claim of the ability to defy physics collected dust for decades, as no one, not even Uri Geller, was able or willing to have their claims tested under very strict observed conditions. I must sadly report that all those spoons died in vain, dear uncles. So it seems spoon bending has been returned to the sad silverware drawer of history's dustbin. Sorry, I realize I bent the shit out of those metaphors, but both Randy and Johnny Carson have fled this veil of tears for the great not beyond. But what of the peculiar Uri Geller? Well, he's still out there. I mentioned he is incredibly litigious. He's sued several magicians and illusionists, I guess for revealing his secrets. He's sued the amazing Randy more than once, and in more than one country. He's sued Pokemon, Timex, the UK Broadcasting Standards Commission, and even IKEA, all for playing with or off of his spoon-bending shtick. IKEA specifically had a line of furniture with silly bent legs they called the Uri line of products.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah, and he claims the image of a bent spoon is his and his alone.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the courts have not always agreed with him.
Yeah, I love that.
I'd love to know why he sued Pokemon.
Because it's kind of convoluted, but they made a character that had a kind of a spoon-looking image on it, and the name was a funky name in Japan, as a Japanese person would pronounce it. Kind of came out as Uri Geller. So he sued over that was his like identity, and so Pokemon removed this creature from Pokemon.
I love that he sued. I'm guessing that he sued magicians for doing literally exactly what he does, and then saying,
"But that's it.
You make just look at. I can do all of the things that he does, and I'm using trickery.
Yeah.
What do you think he's doing?"
Right, and that's what he would. And he would say, "Well, I'm doing it with actual psychokinesis. They're using trickery."
Right.
And Randy, for years, the amazing Randy would just follow this guy from TV studio to TV studio and say, "I am doing this with no magical nothing," and do exactly this. He'd bend a key. He'd bend the spoon. He'd break the spoon in half. Exactly the same thing Geller was doing, and the hosts were heartbroken. Because there was this weird, like, I want to believe this guy's capable of it.
It's so funny.
There's a funny thing, too. Like, when you watch Uri Geller, and you kind of see him, especially when he was younger and doing this a lot, he seems like a great guy. Like, he seems really sweet and nice, and I think people were drawn in by that charm he had, right?
Yeah.
So
I think people were... What's really funny is that I remember wanting this to be real, but I wanted the Force to be real in Star Wars too. But did anyone stop to think this amount of psychokinesis is not useful? Right. Did anyone point out the fact that the ability to bend a spoon does not serve any function or
Well, that's not exactly true.
We were all hoping that it would get bigger than that.
What if you're the?
But it never did.
What if you're the only psychokinetic psychic at a dinner party, and the host goes to lay out the silverware, and they say, "Oh no, the spoon is so bent."
Yeah.
Right. That's like the guy on the plane screaming, "Is there a doctor on board?" This is your moment. You can unbend that shit.
Except that nobody's talked about unbending.
Oh, maybe he can't unbend. Maybe that's
spoon fixing is a totally different thing.
Spoon straightening.
Well, I mean, it's a good point though that I think, Dan, I'm with you. Everyone thought this was going to get to well, it's spoons now, but wait till I get going.
Right.
Wait till I exercise my telekinetic muscles, and I'm going to open the bank vault.
Yeah, eventually I'm going to be able to pull an X-wing out of the swamp.
I'll tell you what a quote useful claim Geller makes here for his powers, and that is when he's not suing everybody. He's claimed he was a super secret agent for both the Mossad and the CIA.
Of course.
That he had erased hard drives in the possession of the KGB by saying the word erase again and again. And this is a true fact. He actually negotiated the infamous TV interviews with Martin Bashir and Michael Jackson. And in 2009, he purchased a 500 square meter uninhabited island off the coast of Scotland, claiming that Tutankhamun's half-sister had buried treasure there, and that and that he would strengthen the magical power of the island by burying a magic crystal ball that once belonged to Albert Einstein. So,
oh my God.
Hot girl
awesome.
shit. So that, dear friends, is the magical tale of a whole bunch of nuttery around cutlery. Spoon bending. Let's bring spoonbender back as an adjective. Huh, guys?
Yay!
A couple observations. How much could a 250 square meter island?
500 square meter island off the... I don't know. It's maybe a lot.
I don't know. But I just,
our next Patreon goal is to buy an island, you guys.
He somehow has a lot of money, and I'm not sure how he does.
Weird.
Yeah, he has a lot of money.
And the only other thing I'd say is, Mark, you sent me down a rabbit hole of looking up old 70s TV shows. And is it Chaka? Is Chaka
Yes.
Yes.
Is it me, or does Chaka seem really racist?
Oh, probably. Chaka seems really racist.
I don't know why. He's supposed to be depicting like a caveman or a Neanderthal, but it's like There's something that just doesn't seem right about this.
A cave boy, but he's also kind of in blackface, like brownface at the same time.
It's a little bit weirdly unsettling. I don't know why, but
there's nothing right about that.
I think the key here is the lesson we've learned is don't revisit the 70s for any reason whatsoever.
And next segment, let's go back to the 70s.
All right, well, let's move on.